The poster went up on a Tuesday morning, taped to the front window of the only grocery store in Ridgewood. It was bright yellow, with bold black letters announcing the annual community talent show, and underneath the details was a list of participants. Most of the names were familiar. There was the retired music teacher who played piano every year. There was the group of high school girls who always did some kind of dance routine. There was the barbershop quartet made up of 4 old men who had been singing together since before most people in town were born. But this year, there was one name that made people stop and look twice. Near the bottom of the list, written in careful handwriting, was the name Lin Mei Hua, and next to her name, in the column marked Talent, someone had written a single word: singer. By noon, half the town had heard about it. By evening, it was all anyone could talk about. Lin Mei Hua was 49 years old and had lived in Ridgewood for almost 23 years. In all that time, most people couldn't remember hearing her say more than a few words at a time. She worked the overnight shift at the packaging plant on the edge of town, the one that processed frozen vegetables for supermarkets across the state. She clocked in at 10 at night and clocked out at 6 in the morning, which meant she lived her life on a schedule opposite to everyone else. During the day, when other people were going about their business, Mei Hua was sleeping in her small trailer at the end of Willow Creek Road. It was an old trailer, the kind with rounded edges and rust spots around the wheel wells. The paint had faded from white to a kind of yellowish gray, and the little garden out front was always a bit overgrown. But Mei Hua kept it clean and paid her lot rent on time, so nobody bothered her about it. She was what people in Ridgewood called a character, which was their polite way of saying she was strange. She walked everywhere because she didn't own a car. She wore the same rotation of clothes that looked like they came from the donation bin at the church. Her English was good but heavily accented, and she had a way of looking at people that made them uncomfortable, like she could see something they couldn't. Most of all, she kept to herself. She didn't come to the summer barbecues or the Christmas bazaar. She didn't stand around chatting after Sunday service at the church she occasionally attended. She came and went like a ghost. Always alone, always quiet. So when people saw her name on that talent show list, the reaction was immediate. "Did you see?" one woman said to another in the produce aisle. "That Chinese lady signed up to sing. Can you imagine? She probably doesn't even speak enough English to get through a whole song," the other woman replied, shaking her head. At the diner on Main Street, a group of men having their morning coffee had a good laugh about it. "Maybe she's going to sing in Chinese," one of them joked. "Nobody will know if she's any good or not. I didn't even know she could talk, let alone sing," another one added. The teenagers were even worse. A group of them gathered around the poster after school, taking pictures with their phones and posting them online with crying, laughing emojis. One boy recorded himself pretending to sing opera in a mocking, high-pitched voice, tagging it with the name of the talent show. Within hours, it had been shared dozens of times. Word spread fast in a small town, and soon everyone had an opinion about the quiet lady from the trailer park who had apparently lost her mind. Some people were amused. Some people were embarrassed for her. A few people were even a little annoyed, like she was making a fool of herself and dragging the whole community into it. But nobody, not a single person, thought she might actually be any good. The talent show coordinator, a woman named Betty who had been running the event for 15 years, had been hesitant to accept the registration in the first place. When Mei Hua had come to the community center to sign up, Betty had looked at her over the top of her reading glasses with obvious doubt. "You want to sing?" Betty had asked, as if she might have heard wrong. Mei Hua nodded. Her face showed new expression, new embarrassment, new defensiveness. Just a calm, steady look. "Have you ever performed before?" Betty asked. "A long time ago," Mei Hua said quietly. Betty waited for more explanation, but none came. She sighed and slid the registration form across the desk. "Well, everyone's welcome to participate. That's what the talent show is for." But after Mei Hua left, Betty picked up the phone and called her friend who worked at the packaging plant. "Do you know anything about Lin Mei Hua?" she asked. The one who works nights? That odd woman who lives in the trailer? Her friend replied. Not really. She's been there forever, but nobody knows much about her. She keeps her head down, does her job, goes home. Why? She just signed up to sing in the talent show. There was a pause, and then her friend burst out laughing. You're kidding. I didn't even know she talked. She doesn't, really. I don't know what to think about this. Well, her friend said, still chuckling. That word, entertaining, was exactly what most people expected. They expected to be entertained in the way that watching someone fail is entertaining. They expected second-hand embarrassment and awkward silences. They expected to tell the story afterward, shaking their heads about the poor, strange woman who thought she could sing. Mei Hua knew what they were saying. She heard the whispers when she walked to the grocery store for her weekly shopping. She saw the way people looked at her, a mix of pity and amusement. One afternoon, she overheard two young women in the bread aisle. I feel kind of bad for her, one of them said. She's going to get up there and embarrass herself in front of the whole town. Maybe someone should tell her, the other one replied. Like, gently suggest she drop out. Save her the humiliation. Mei Hua picked up a loaf of bread and placed it in her basket. She didn't look at them. She didn't react at all. But she heard every word. At work, it was the same. The overnight shift at the packaging plant was small. Just 8 or 9 people moving through the dark hours. And word had already spread. Most of her coworkers didn't say anything to her face, but she could feel them watching her, talking about her when they thought she couldn't hear. One night, a younger man named Danny approached her during their 15-minute break. He was one of the few people at the plant who had ever tried to make conversation with her. Hey, so I heard you're doing the talent show, he said, trying to sound casual. Mei Hua looked up from her tea. Yes, that's cool. What are you going to sing? She was quiet for a moment. An old song. Danny nodded, clearly hoping for more details. When none came, he shifted awkwardly. Well, good luck. I'm sure you'll do great. But his voice didn't match his words. And they both knew it. He thought she was going to fail, just like everyone else did. He was just too polite to say so. Mei Hua went back to her tea. She didn't try to explain herself. She didn't try to defend her decision or convince anyone that she knew what she was doing. She just sat there in the break room, surrounded by the hum of machinery and the distant sounds of her co-workers' laughter, completely alone. The thing was, Mei Hua had spent a long time being alone. She had spent a long time being overlooked and underestimated. She had spent a long time watching life happen around her while she stayed invisible. And in all that time, she had learned something important. People see what they expect to see. They had already decided who she was based on where she lived, how she looked, how little she said. They had put her in a box marked, "Nobody special," and they had stopped looking any further. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that the person they saw was not the whole story. Not even close. She had not always been the quiet woman in the trailer at the end of Willow Creek Road. She had not always been invisible. Once, a very long time ago, she had been someone else, entirely. Someone who burned so bright that people couldn't look away. But that was before. Before everything changed. Before she lost everything that mattered and had to build a new life from the ashes of the old one. Now, 23 years later, she had signed up to sing in a small-town talent show, and everyone thought she was a joke. She let them think it. She didn't owe them an explanation. She didn't owe them anything. All she owed was to herself, to the girl she used to be, and to the woman she had become. She owed it to both of them, to stand on that stage and open her mouth and let the music come out. Whatever happened after that, at least she would know she had tried. At least she would know she was still alive. 26 years before anyone in Ridgewood had ever heard her name, Lin Mei Hua was living a completely different life, in a completely different world. She was 23 years old, and she was on fire. She had arrived in New York City at 18, with nothing but a suitcase, a scholarship letter, and a voice that made people stop whatever they were doing and listen. She had won a place at one of the most prestigious music conservatories in the country, beating out hundreds of other applicants from all over the world. Her teachers called her a once-in-a-generation talent. Her classmates were in awe of her. Her future seemed written in stone. Back then, everyone called her May. Just May. She wore her hair long and loose. She dressed in bright colors and walked with her chin up. She laughed easily and often. She was the kind of person who walked into a room and changed the energy of it, who made people feel like something exciting was about to happen. Her voice was the kind that couldn't be taught. Technically, she was nearly perfect, with a range that extended from low notes that vibrated in your chest to high notes so pure they seemed to hang in the air like crystals. But it wasn't just the technical ability that set her apart. It was what she did with it. When May sang, you didn't just hear the music. You felt it. She had a way of reaching inside you and touching something raw and real, something you didn't even know was there. Her specialty was opera, Italian opera, specifically, the big dramatic pieces with soaring melodies and emotions that shook the walls. She could sing lighter pieces too, lighter and art songs and even some jazz standards when the mood struck her. But opera was where she truly came alive. On stage, in costume, with an orchestra swelling behind her, she transformed into something more than human. The plan had been simple. Graduate from the conservatory, win a spot in a major opera company, build a career, travel the world, become one of the great ones. And for a while, it looked like that was exactly what was going to happen. In her final year, May was offered the opportunity of a lifetime. A famous opera company in the city was staging a new production of La Bohème, and they needed a young soprano for the role of Musetta. It was a supporting role, not the lead, but it was a real professional debut, on a real professional stage. It was the first step on the ladder she had been climbing toward her whole life. Rehearsals were scheduled to begin in March. The production would open in May. May could barely sleep from the excitement. And then, one night in February, the phone rang. She was in her tiny apartment near the conservatory, going over her score for what must have been the 100th time, when the sound cut through the silence. She picked up the receiver and heard her father's voice, thin and breaking. Her mother had collapsed. A stroke, the doctor said. A bad one. She was alive, but barely, and the prognosis was not good. May stood there in her kitchen, the phone pressed to her ear, and felt her whole world shift on its axis. Her parents lived in Ohio, in a small house in a small town, where her father worked at a hardware store, and her mother had cleaned offices until her health started to fail. They had sacrificed everything to send her to New York. They had emptied their savings, taken on extra work, gone without things they needed so that she could chase her dream. I need to come home, May said. No, her father replied. You have your debut. Your mother would never forgive me if you gave that up. But there was something in his voice that told her the truth. Something desperate and scared and falling apart. Her father had never been good at handling crisis. When things got hard, he shut down. And sometimes, when things got really hard, he reached for the bottle. It had been years since his drinking had been a problem. May had been a teenager the last time, and her mother had somehow managed to pull him back from the edge. But now her mother was lying in a hospital bed, unable to speak, unable to move the entire right side of her body. Who was going to pull him back this time? May told herself she would just go for a few days. She would make sure her mother was stable, make sure her father was okay, and then she would come back. There was still time before rehearsals started. She could handle this. But when she got home and saw her father sitting at the kitchen table with a half-empty bottle in front of him, his eyes red and his hands shaking, she knew a few days wasn't going to be enough. And when she went to the hospital and saw her mother, so small and frail in that big white bed, tubes running in and out of her body, she knew she couldn't leave. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. The date of her debut came and went. She called the opera company and apologized, her voice barely steady. They told her they understood, that these things happen, that maybe there would be another opportunity someday. But deep down, she knew the truth. Opportunities like that didn't come twice. She had missed her moment, and there might never be another one. Her mother survived, but she never fully recovered. The stroke had taken too much. She could walk again, eventually, with a cane and a lot of help. She could speak, but the words came slowly and sometimes got mixed up. She needed care. Constant care. The kind of care you couldn't give from 800 miles away. And her father, true to form, had fallen apart. The drinking got worse before it got better. There were nights when May came home from the hospital to find him passed out on the couch. There were mornings when she had to pour coffee down his throat and drive him to work because he couldn't drive himself. There were arguments and tears and long silences that stretched for days. Slowly, painfully, she brought him back. She got him to meetings. She stayed up with him on the bad nights. She was there, every single day, holding the pieces together through sheer force of will. The conservatory granted her a leave of absence, then another one, then finally sent a letter suggesting she might want to withdraw from the program. She never responded to that letter. She just let it sit on her dresser, gathering dust, until one day she threw it away without reading it again. She got a job at a restaurant in town, waiting tables. Then she got another job at a cleaning company, working nights. The money wasn't good, but it was enough to keep things going, enough to pay for her mother's medications, enough to keep the lights on and food on the table. She stopped singing, not all at once. At first, she just didn't have time. Then she just didn't have energy. Then, one day, she tried to sing while washing dishes, and the sound that came out was so full of grief that she had to stop. She stood there at the sink, with tears running down her face, and she made a decision. The music was from another life. A life where she was young and hopeful, and believed that dreams came true. That life was over now. This was her life, this small town and this small house, and these two people who needed her. This was what she had chosen. She packed away her sheet music, and her recordings, and her dreams. She put them in a box and stored them in the back of a closet. And she didn't look at them again. Years passed. Her mother died when May was 32. Quietly, in her sleep, after a second stroke that her body was too weak to fight. Her father followed 3 years later, his liver finally giving out after decades of damage. May was there for both of them, holding their hands, telling them she loved them, watching them go. After the funerals, after the paperwork, after the house was sold and the debts were paid, there was almost nothing left. A few $1,000s. Some photographs. A lifetime of memories, most of them painful. Mei Hua was 35 years old, alone in the world, with no career, no savings, and no plan. She could have gone back to New York. She could have tried to start over, to reclaim some piece of the dream she had given up. But the thought of it made her feel sick. That world had moved on without her. The people she had known were gone or famous or both. She was a decade older and a lifetime sadder, and the bright-eyed girl who had once burned with ambition felt like a stranger. So she did what people do when they have nothing left. She started over. She moved to Ridgewood because it was cheap and far away, and nobody knew her there. She got the job at the packaging plant because it was the first job she could find. She bought the trailer because it was the only thing she could afford. And she built a new life, piece by piece, day by day, night by night. She didn't make friends. She didn't go out. She didn't do anything that might connect her to the world she had left behind. She just worked and slept and survived. And she never, ever sang. 23 years. That was how long she had been silent. 23 years of keeping the music locked inside her, pretending it didn't exist, pretending she had never been anyone other than the quiet woman in the trailer park. Sometimes, late at night, she would lie awake and remember. She would remember the feeling of standing on stage, the lights hot on her face, the audience holding its breath. She would remember the music flowing through her like electricity, like fire, like something divine. She would remember what it felt like to be truly alive. And then she would push the memories away and close her eyes and try to sleep. The past was the past. It couldn't be changed. It could only be survived, or so she had believed. For 23 long years, until one morning, walking past the grocery store, she saw the poster for the talent show. And something inside her, something she thought had died a long time ago, suddenly woke up. It wasn't a decision, exactly. It was more like a compulsion. Like her feet were moving toward the community center before her brain could tell them to stop. Like the pen was in her hand before she could think about what she was doing. She wrote her name on the registration form. And for the first time in over 2 decades, Lin Mei Hua felt something other than numbness. She felt terrified. The past was not the past, she realized. It was still there, inside her, waiting. The music was still there, locked away but not destroyed. Maybe it was time to finally let it out. The first time Mei Hua tried to sing again, she couldn't even get through a single phrase. It was 3 a.m, 2 days after she had signed up for the talent show. She was sitting in her trailer, alone, with all the windows closed and the lights off. She had chosen a simple song, an Italian art song she had learned in her first year at the conservatory. Nothing too difficult, nothing too high, just a gentle melody to test the waters. She opened her mouth. She took a breath, and what came out was a disaster. Her voice cracked on the first note. Her breath ran out halfway through the second. By the third note, she was coughing, her throat tight and burning like she had swallowed sand. She tried again, pushing harder, and the sound that came out was thin and wobbly and wrong. It didn't sound like music. It sounded like an animal in pain. She stopped. She sat there in the darkness, her hands shaking, her eyes stinging with tears she refused to let fall. 23 years. 23 years of silence. And this was what was left. A broken instrument. A rusted machine. Whatever gift she had once possessed, whatever magic had lived in her voice, it was gone now. Destroyed by time and neglect and grief. She had been a fool to think she could do this. A fool to think she could just walk back into the light after so many years in the dark. The people in town were right to laugh at her. She was going to get up on that stage and humiliate herself in front of everyone, and then she would have to live with that shame for the rest of her life. For a long moment, she considered giving up. She could go to the community center tomorrow and take her name off the list. She could tell them she had changed her mind, that something had come up, that she couldn't do it after all. Nobody would be surprised. Nobody would even care. She would just go back to being invisible, and life would continue exactly as it had before. But as she sat there in the dark, something else rose up inside her. Something stubborn. Something angry. She thought about her mother, who had scrubbed floors and cleaned toilets so that her daughter could have a chance at something better. She thought about her father, who had worked double shifts at the hardware store to pay for voice lessons. She thought about all the sacrifices they had made, all the years they had spent believing in her, and she thought about herself. About the girl who had stood on stage in New York and felt the music move through her, like a river. About the young woman who had been told she was special, that she had something rare, that she was going to change the world. That girl was still in there somewhere. She had to be. You don't just lose something like that. You bury it, maybe. You hide it away. But you don't lose it. Mei Hua wiped her eyes. She stood up. She was going to find that girl again. She was going to dig her out from under 23 years of silence and grief and fear. and she was going to sing. But she couldn't practice in the trailer. The walls were thin, and her neighbors would hear. The last thing she needed was more gossip, more laughter, more people talking about the crazy lady who thought she could sing. She needed somewhere private, somewhere nobody would find her. The next night, after her shift at the plant ended at 2 in the morning, she drove out of town instead of heading home. She followed the old county road for about 15 minutes, until she reached a place she had discovered years ago. A place nobody seemed to know about anymore. It was an abandoned barn on a piece of land that had been empty for decades. The farm it belonged to had failed a long time ago, and the family who owned it had moved away and never come back. The barn itself was falling apart, with holes in the roof and broken windows and weeds growing up through the wooden floor. But it was isolated, far from any houses, surrounded by nothing but fields and darkness. It was perfect. Mei Hua parked her car behind the barn, where nobody could see it from the road. She walked inside, using her phone as a flashlight, picking her way carefully through the debris. The air smelled like old hay and rust and time. Somewhere in the rafters, she could hear birds settling into sleep. She found a spot near the center of the barn where the floor was still solid. She stood there, feeling the cold night air on her face, the silence pressing in around her. And she began. She started with breathing exercises, the same ones her teachers had drilled into her all those years ago. Breathe in through the nose, slow and deep. Let the belly expand. Hold. Then out through the mouth. Controlled, steady. Again. Her body had forgotten how to do this. Her lungs felt small and tight. Her diaphragm, the muscle that was supposed to support her voice, was weak and unresponsive. She had to relearn everything from scratch, like a baby learning to walk. She spent that first night just breathing. No singing at all. Just breathing and remembering and trying not to cry. The second night, she added humming. Simple humming. Up and down a scale. Nothing more. Her voice wobbled and broke. Her range was pathetic, barely an octave and a half. But she kept going. Up and down. Up and down. The third night, she tried actual notes. Just the vowel sounds her teachers had taught her. Ah, e, o, oo. She sang them on a single pitch, then moved up a half step, then another. Her voice cracked. It wavered. It sounded nothing like it used to, but it was there. Underneath all the rust and damage, there was still something there. Night after night, she returned to the barn. Night after night, she pushed herself a little further. She did lip trills and tongue exercises. She worked on her breath support, doing planks and sit-ups on the dirty floor to strengthen her core. She practiced scales, starting small and gradually expanding her range. It was painful. Not just physically, but emotionally. Every note she sang brought back memories. Memories of who she used to be. Memories of what she had lost. Sometimes she would hit a phrase that sounded almost right. Almost like the old days. And the grief would hit her so hard, she would have to stop and sit down and wait for it to pass. But she didn't quit. She couldn't quit. Not now. Not when she had come this far. By the end of the second week, something started to shift. Her voice began to remember. The cracks became less frequent. Her range expanded, slowly but surely, reaching back toward the notes she used to hit with ease. Her breath support improved. Her body started to feel like her own again. She chose her song, Nessun Dorma. It was risky. It was ambitious. It was a song written for a tenor, which she had to transpose to fit her voice. But it was also perfect. The lyrics were about someone who refuses to give up, who keeps fighting through the darkness, who believes that dawn will come even in the longest night. It was the story of her life. She practiced it over and over, breaking it down phrase by phrase, working on the Italian pronunciation, the dynamics, the emotional arc. She practiced it until she knew every breath, every pause, every tiny detail by heart. 3 weeks. That was all she had. 3 weeks to undo 23 years of silence. On the night before the talent show, she stood in the barn one last time. The air was cold, and her breath made little clouds in front of her face. She was exhausted. Her voice was tired. Her body ached. But she was ready. She sang the song all the way through, from the first quiet notes to the triumphant final phrase. And when she finished, she stood there in the darkness and listened to the silence. For the first time in over 2 decades, she felt like herself again. Not the Mei Hua who worked at the packaging plant, not the quiet woman in the trailer park, but Mei, the girl who had set the world on fire, the woman who had music in her soul. She was still there. She had been there all along. Tomorrow, the whole town would see her. Tomorrow, the people who had laughed at her, who had pitied her, who had written her off as nobody, would learn the truth. Tomorrow, she would sing. And whatever happened after that, she knew one thing for certain. She was not going to that stage to prove anything to them. She was going for herself, for her mother, for her father, for the girl she used to be, and the woman she had become. She was going to sing because she was a singer, because that was who she was, who she had always been, who she would always be, no matter what anyone else thought, no matter what anyone else said. She was going to open her mouth and let the music come out. And for the first time in 23 years, she was not afraid. The community center was packed. Every folding chair was filled, and people lined the walls at the back, standing shoulder to shoulder. The annual talent show had always been popular. But this year, there was something extra in the air. A buzz of anticipation. A crackle of curiosity. Everyone wanted to see what the strange lady from the trailer park was going to do. Backstage, the other performers were getting ready. The high school dance team was stretching and giggling. The barbershop quartet was warming up with their usual harmony exercises. The retired music teacher was sitting at the piano, going over his sheet music one more time. And in the corner, alone, was Mei Hua. She wore a simple black dress that she had bought years ago at a thrift store and never worn. She had done her hair differently tonight, pulling it back from her face in a way that made her look elegant, almost regal. She wore no jewelry except for a small jade pendant that had belonged to her mother. She was very still. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her eyes were closed. If you didn't know better, you might think she was sleeping. But inside, her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The show began. One by one, the performers went out and did their acts. The dance team earned enthusiastic applause. The barbershop quartet got everyone clapping along. A young boy played the drums, and a woman did a comedy routine that had people laughing until they were wiping their eyes. Then Betty, the coordinator, walked onto the stage with her clipboard. "Our next performer is Lin Mei Hua," she said, reading from the list. "She'll be singing for us tonight." A murmur rippled through the crowd. People shifted in their seats. Some exchanged glances, a few suppressed smiles. In the back row, the teenagers who had made fun of her on social media elbowed each other and pulled out their phones, ready to record what they were sure would be a disaster. Mei Hua stood up. She walked toward the stage entrance. Her legs felt numb. Her hands were ice cold. For one terrible moment, she thought she might not be able to do it. She thought the fear might swallow her whole, might freeze her in place, might make her turn and run. But then she remembered her mother's face. She remembered her father's hands, rough from work, counting out money for her voice lessons. She remembered the barn, and the darkness, and the way the music had come back to her, night after night, note by note. She stepped onto the stage. The lights were bright, so bright that she could barely see the audience. But she could feel them. Hundreds of eyes, all watching, all waiting. The silence was heavy, expectant, tinged with something that might have been pity or might have been judgment. She walked to the center of the stage. She nodded to the accompanist, a young man from the local church who had agreed to play for her. He had seemed skeptical when she had given him the sheet music, but he had learned it anyway. The first notes of the piano filled the room. Mei Hua closed her eyes. She took a breath, deep and slow, the way she had practiced. She felt her diaphragm engage, felt her body settle into position, and then she opened her mouth and began to sing. The first phrase was quiet, soft, almost conversational. Nessun dorma. None shall sleep. The words were Italian, but the emotion was universal. A longing, a hope, a determination to endure. A few people in the audience frowned. This was not what they had expected. They had expected bad karaoke, maybe. Off-key, warbling, something to laugh about later. This was something else entirely. As the song built, so did her voice. The second phrase was stronger, richer, with a vibrato that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. The melody rose and fell like waves on an ocean, and she rode each one with perfect control. By the end of the first verse, the audience had gone completely still. The smirks had faded. The phones had been lowered. Even the teenagers in the back were sitting forward in their seats, their mouths slightly open, because what they were hearing was impossible. It didn't make sense. This couldn't be the same woman who shuffled through the grocery store in worn-out shoes. This couldn't be the quiet nobody from the trailer park. This was something extraordinary. The song continued. The melody grew more intense, more passionate. Mei Hua's voice filled the room, not just with sound but with feeling. Every note carried weight. Every phrase told a story. She sang about waiting for dawn, about refusing to surrender, about the victory that comes to those who persevere. And everyone in that room understood, somehow, that she was not just singing a song. She was singing her life. In the front row, Betty the coordinator had tears streaming down her face. She couldn't have said why. She just knew that something was happening here, something she had never expected, something she would remember for the rest of her life. Behind her, an older man who had spent 30 years working at the packaging plant was crying too. He thought about all the nights he had worked alongside that quiet woman, never once imagining that this voice was living inside her. He thought about how quick he had been to dismiss her, to write her off as nothing special. He felt ashamed. All over the audience, similar realizations were happening. People who had laughed were now silent. People who had mocked were now moved. The judgment that had filled the room when she walked on stage had transformed into something else. Wonder, awe, regret. The song reached its climax. The melody soared upward, demanding everything, and Mei Hua rose to meet it. Her voice expanded, filling every corner of the room, reaching notes that seemed impossible for a human being to produce. It was powerful and pure and achingly beautiful. And then came the final phrase, Vincirò. I will win. The word hung in the air, sustained by a note that went on and on, unwavering, triumphant. She held it longer than anyone thought possible, pouring every ounce of herself into that single sound. Then, silence. For what felt like eternity, nobody moved, nobody breathed, and then the room exploded. The applause was not polite. It was not the kind of clapping people do, because they think they are supposed to. It was raw and real and overwhelming. People were on their feet before they even realized they were standing. They were shouting. They were crying. In the front row, a woman who had whispered about her in the grocery store was sobbing into her hands. In the back, one of the teenagers who had made the mocking video had tears running down his cheeks. He wasn't recording anymore. He couldn't. His hands were shaking too badly. Mei Hua stood there in the center of the stage, bathed in light, surrounded by sound. The applause washed over her like a wave, and for a moment, she didn't know what to do. This was not what she had expected. This was not what she had prepared for. She had prepared to be laughed at. She had prepared to be pitied. She had prepared to walk off the stage with her head held high, regardless of the response. She had not prepared for this. Slowly, carefully, she bowed. A simple, graceful movement. And when she lifted her head again, there were tears on her face too. Not tears of sadness, not tears of pain, tears of release. 23 years. 23 years of silence. 23 years of grief and sacrifice and survival. It was over. The music had come back. The gift had returned. The girl she used to be was standing on this stage. Older now, worn by life, but alive. Still alive. She had won, not the competition. She didn't care about that. She had won something far more important. She had won herself back. The applause continued, on and on, as she walked off the stage. People reached out to touch her arm, to grab her hand, to tell her things she couldn't hear over the noise. Betty was there, hugging her, saying something about how she had never, in all her years of running this show, seen anything like that. Mei Hua nodded and smiled and said thank you, over and over, until the words lost all meaning. Later, after the show was over, after she had won the first prize that everyone agreed she deserved, after people had lined up to tell her their stories and ask for hers, she drove back to her trailer alone. She sat in the darkness for a long time, listening to the silence. It was different now, that silence. It used to feel like a prison, a heavy blanket smothering her, keeping the music trapped inside. Now it felt like peace. She had done it. She had actually done it. And tomorrow, for the first time in 23 years, she would wake up as someone new. Someone who had been lost and was now found. Someone who had been silent and could finally sing. Someone who had been a laughingstock and had brought a room full of strangers to tears. She sat there in the dark, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she smiled. The morning after the talent show, Mei Hua woke up to something she had never experienced before in Ridgewood. Someone was knocking on her door. She sat up in bed, confused. In all the years she had lived in this trailer, nobody had ever knocked on her door. The mailman left packages on the step. Her landlord sent bills through the mail. She had no friends, no visitors, no reason for anyone to come by. But there it was again. Knock, knock, knock. She pulled on her robe and opened the door to find a woman standing there with a casserole dish in her hands. It was one of her neighbors from down the road. A woman named Helen who had lived in the trailer park for as long as Mei Hua had. "I just wanted to bring you this," Helen said, thrusting the dish forward. "And to say that what you did last night was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard in my life." Before Mei Hua could respond, Helen was crying. "I'm so sorry," she said, wiping her eyes. "I'm so sorry for the way we all treated you. For the things we said. We didn't know. We had no idea." Mei Hua didn't know what to say. She took the casserole dish and thanked the woman. And Helen hugged her. A quick, tight embrace that seemed to surprise them both. That was just the beginning. Throughout the day, people kept coming. They came with food and flowers and cards. They came with apologies and questions and stories of their own. They came because they had heard what happened, or because they had been there themselves, or because someone had shown them the video that one of the teenagers had posted online, the one that was already spreading far beyond the borders of Ridgewood. By evening, Mei Hua's tiny kitchen table was covered with casserole dishes, and her counter was lined with bouquets. She had shaken more hands and received more hugs in one day than she had in the previous 20 years combined. It was overwhelming. It was exhausting. It was completely, utterly strange. But it was also, she had to admit, kind of wonderful. The phone calls started the next day. Somehow, her number had gotten out, and people she had never met were calling to tell her how much her performance had meant to them. Some of them cried. Some of them said she had inspired them to try something they had been afraid to do. Some of them just wanted to hear her voice, to confirm that she was real. Then came the offers. A local church wanted her to sing at their Sunday service. A women's group wanted her to speak at their annual luncheon. A music teacher from the next town over wanted to know if she would be interested in giving lessons. A community theater was staging an opera and wondered if she might consider auditioning for the lead. And then, about a week after the talent show, she received a phone call from a television producer. Someone had sent them the video from the talent show, the producer explained. They loved it. They wanted to feature her story on their show. They would fly her out, put her up in a nice hotel, let her tell her story to a national audience. It would be incredible exposure. It would change her life. Mei Hua listened to the pitch. She asked a few questions. She said she would think about it. And then she said no. The producer was stunned. No? Are you sure? This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I'm sure, Mei Hua said. Thank you for thinking of me. But this isn't what I want. She said no to most of the other offers too. The speaking engagements, the auditions, the requests for interviews and appearances, and all the other things that would have turned her into something she didn't want to be. She wasn't interested in fame. She wasn't interested in attention. She had not sung that night to become a celebrity, or to launch a comeback, or to prove anything to anyone except herself. She had sung because she needed to sing, because the music had been trapped inside her for too long, and it was time to let it out. Because she owed it to her parents, and to the girl she used to be, and to the woman she had become. That was all. That was enough. But she didn't go back to being invisible either. She couldn't, even if she wanted to. The video from the talent show had been viewed hundreds of thousands of times. People recognized her now when she walked through town. They stopped her in the grocery store to tell her how much her performance had meant to them. They waved to her from their cars. They called out greetings. It was strange, being seen after so many years of being invisible. Strange, but not entirely unwelcome. She kept her job at the packaging plant. She liked the work, liked the routine, liked the quiet hours when most of the world was asleep. But things were different now. Her co-workers treated her differently. Not worse, just different. With a kind of respect, maybe, or curiosity. Danny, the young man who had wished her luck before the show, had become something like a friend. He asked her questions about music, about her life before Ridgewood, about what it had felt like to stand on that stage. She answered some of his questions. Not all of them. Some things were still too private, too painful to share. But she found that she didn't mind talking, now and then, to someone who genuinely wanted to listen. She did agree to a few things. She sang at the church, once, and the congregation sat in stunned silence, just like the talent show audience had. She gave a few voice lessons to a teenage girl who reminded her of herself at that age. All raw talent and big dreams. She joined the community choir, which met on Wednesday evenings and wasn't very good, but was full of kind people who loved music. Small things. Quiet things. A life that was fuller than it had been, but still, recognizably, her own. And she sang, not on stages, mostly. Not for audiences, but for herself. In the early morning hours before her shift at the plant, or in the late evenings before she went to sleep, she sang in her trailer, with the windows open so the sound drifted out into the night. She sang the arias she had learned all those years ago, and she sang new songs she had discovered. And sometimes she sang nothing at all. Just sounds and scales and melodies that came to her in the moment. Her neighbors didn't complain. They told her they loved it. They said they sat on their porches in the evenings just to listen. One night, about 6 months after the talent show, Mei Hua was sitting in her trailer when there was a knock at the door. It was Helen again, the neighbor who had brought the casserole, but this time she had a different expression on her face. "There's a man here to see you," Helen said. "He says he knew you a long time ago. In New York." Mei Hua felt her heart stop. She went to the door, and standing there in the fading light was a face she hadn't seen in over 25 years. An old classmate from the conservatory. A tenor who had gone on to have the career she had once dreamed of. "May," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I saw the video. I couldn't believe it. I had to come and see for myself." They talked for hours. He told her about his life, his career, the successes and the failures, and the things he had learned along the way. She told him about hers, about her parents, about the years of silence, about the barn and the talent show and everything that had happened since. At the end of the night, he asked her the question she had been dreading. "Would you ever come back? To the professional world? You still have it, May. That gift. It's still there. You could still do something with it." She was quiet for a long time. She thought about the bright lights and the big stages and the life she had once imagined for herself. She thought about what it would mean to chase that dream again, after all these years. And then she smiled and shook her head. "I already did something with it," she said. "I reminded myself who I am." He nodded. He understood, or at least he tried to. After he left, Mei Hua stood in the doorway of her trailer and looked out at the night sky. The stars were out, thousands of them, scattered across the darkness like notes on a page. She thought about her life, the dreams she had lost, the years she had sacrificed, the music that had been silent for so long and had finally come back. She had not become famous. She had not launched a comeback. She had not done any of the things the world might have expected her to do. But she had done something better. She had found herself again. She had remembered who she was. She had taken the music that lived inside her and let it out into the world, even if only for one night, even if only for one room full of strangers who had expected nothing and received everything. That was enough. That was more than enough. She stood there for a long time, looking at the stars, and then, softly, quietly, she began to sing. Not for an audience, not for applause, just for herself, just for the night. The melody drifted out into the darkness, mixing with the sound of crickets and the rustle of wind through the trees. And somewhere in the trailer park, in houses and trailers scattered along the road, people stopped what they were doing and listened. They didn't know the song. They didn't need to. They just knew that it was beautiful, and that was all that mattered.